My name is David Arieti, and I teach here at Oakland Community College. I've been here for over 25 years, and today I am here for a special honor, actually. I want to honor my father, who was a world-famous psychiatrist born in Pisa, Italy. And just recently, I was in Pisa last October of 2014, celebrating the honor of my father, which two psychiatric organizations were dealing with. Every year, I believe, a United States Psychiatric Association meets with the Italian Association together, and they give lectures. And whether it's in Italian or English, if they give a lecture in English, it's written in Italian. They have it on the screen. If it's written in Italian, they translate it into English on the screen. And so this year they were honoring my father's work because on June 28th, 2014 was the 100th anniversary of my father's birth, and they honored my father with a postage stamp, a commemorative stamp, which I found to be very exciting and interesting, and I feel honored. So today, since I teach at this school, I wanted to tell people about my father and the work he has done. And so anyway, here we see the flyer that we have, and I'm going to tell you all about him. And actually, we will be able to see him in action interviewing a 19-year-old female patient who was a catatonic schizophrenic. And my father, he was one of the world's experts on schizophrenia, sometime in the 60s and 70s and late 50s, okay? And so what I'm going to do is tell you a lot about his life and show you pictures, I'll show you his works, and then we'll actually see him in action interviewing a patient, which I find to be interesting. So it was a good idea that we had video in the 70s, and of course I transformed them to this. And again, thank you for coming. Okay. I feel humbled, to be honest with you, because of what you see here. Okay, here I am standing in front of the building where they were honoring my father at a psychiatric meeting. There's a big banner of him, and there I am. And that fellow over there, his name's Luca. He's a psychiatrist too. But anyway, I just thought I'd do that. It was a humbling experience. This is on one of the sides of the Arno River. You know, Pisa is divided up into the Arno River. Anyway. So this is the schedule of events today, and this was the picture I took of the Leaning Tower, and this is the cathedral in the area, and there's one other building missing called the Baptistry. But anyway, this of course is Italy's most famous monument, probably next to the Colosseum, although I prefer that. And anyway, so Pisa is known for the Leaning Tower and the birthplace of Galileo. I should point out, though, that my father and Galileo never met, but that's another story. However, this tower was useful for physics. This is where Galileo dropped the two balls at different weights and found out they hit the ground at the same time. So anyway, so this is the events I'm going to talk about. I'm going to show you a humbling experience, which I just did, me standing in front of his banner. And then the house where he was born, there's something real special about that too. I'm telling you, it seems like they never stop honoring my father, and this is why I feel honored too. They named the street after him. I'm going to show you that. Him on a boat coming to America, marriage to my mother, my father, his father, and me in one picture. The Parnasse, this is a very interesting, true story that I'm going to explain to you too. What this has to do with it. Now, I'm sure none of you have ever heard of the term the Parnasse, but you will know it by the time you leave today. There's a picture of him with his diplomas, his books and articles, important cases he was on, and Peter, Paul, and Mary. What does that have to do with my father? Well, you will find out. Now, I don't know what this is. We may not be able to get the patient, although I have it here. But anyway, so this is the order of events, and then I will show you with the patient. Anyway, here is the stamp that they made for him. I just put a few of them here. This is the main one, the same one you see printed on the outside. And once I showed the stamp to somebody and they thought it was me. And I felt honored, but no, it's my father. There was a slight resemblance or slight difference. Anyway, this was the second time they tried to make a stamp of him. The first time it didn't succeed, but actually that was better because At the time they agreed to make the stamp was actually the 100th anniversary of his birth, you see. Now, something interesting about his birth that I'm going to show you too. Anyway, this stamp cost about 70 cents of a euro. It's about $1, give or take, depending on the exchange rate. The book you see here, well, first of all, he was born in 1914, 1981. And I'm going to show you what happened when the day he was born. Again, something literally earth-shattering occurred, and not because of his birth, because of something else, but I'll explain that in a moment. Now, the picture here was actually a picture that my brother took with my father reading one of his other books that I'm going to show you too. And they just put the Italian translation of the book that he won the National Book Award for. He won the 1975 National Book Award for interpretation of schizophrenia, the second edition, which I have here. It was for science. And I believe Carl Sagan, the famous astronomer, was one of the three on the committee. He has since passed away. But anyway, so what they did was they translated the book, and then they drew in the picture of him reading his book that he wrote in English. By the way, all the books you see here are all his, written in English. I'll explain those later on. Anyway, so he wrote them in English, even though Italian was his native language. And this one, of course, is Interpretation of Schizophrenia. That's the one that won the National Book Award in 1975. Now, there's a picture of me standing in front of a poster of him. I just thought if it looks like me a little bit, a little modesty there. Okay, this is the house he was born in on the street called St. Andreas Street. Now, I'm going to show you the date in a few minutes. Notice how narrow it is. I think the street is narrower than two of these tables. You see it? This is what Pisa looks like. It's very narrow, okay? And there we see a plaque that they put on his house. Now, I'm going to show you what the plaque says. But what happened June 28th, 1914? Now, this is not my father. If you all know history, the Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated the very same day my father was born, okay? Which led, unfortunately, to World War I. So I put his picture here. So it says Archduke Ferdinand of Austria was shot the same day, which precipitated, was shot the same day after my father was born, which precipitated World War I. His assassination in Sarajevo, which was Bosnia now, or one of the Yugoslavian areas, precipitated Austria-Hungary's declaration of war against Serbia. This caused the Central Powers, including Germany and Austria-Hungary and Serbia, allies to declare war on each other, starting World War I. You know, it's as if we never have a time period without any wars. So much for human nature. It appears this is the time where they need psychiatrists to try to talk to people to prevent them from going to war. But I'm sure everybody in this room, we've never known a time of zero war. I can swear to that, right? Even from the time I was born in 1945. Anyway, and my father was a breached baby. He was almost not going to be born alive until he switched around. That's what he was telling me, and he just made it. So he almost was not here. So I wouldn't have been here if he wasn't. Now, this is the plaque, see, that they put on my father's house. Now, it's written in Italian. So I'm going to show you the English translation. Now, again, I feel, again, honored. You know, how many people have a house by whose father was born, have a plaque on it, you know? So this is why it's a humbling experience for me, and I just want to share the good fortune. Anyway, this is what the plaque says. In this house, and by the way, I had this translated by an Italian professor who works here in America, so obviously he knows English quite well. He's actually a microbiologist. In this house, Silvano Arieti was born on June 28, 1914. He received his medical doctorate degree in Pisa in 1936. He went to University of Pisa Medical School. Forced to leave Italy because of the racial laws, he went to the United States, where he became the most famous psychiatrist of his time because of his contribution to the knowledge of schizophrenia and depression. Scientist and humanist, and interpreted the brutal Nazi massacre in St. Andreas Street, and I'll explain that in a moment. He died August 7th, 1981. The city of Pisa placed this plaque for everlasting memory 20 years after his death in 2001, because he died in 1981. Now, what went on in St. Andrea? Well, remember the picture of the house I showed you? Well, I'm going to show you that. Anyway, the picture of the house was right across the street from the house of the leader of the Jewish congregation of that time, called the Parnasse. The Parnasse is a general term in those days which meant the leader of the Jewish congregation. Okay? Now, the leader of the Jewish congregation had a mental illness. You see, he was afraid of animals. Even though they would be non-existent, he would be walking the streets and he would walk with a cane and he would shoo the animals away, see, even though they were non-existent. So this was a perfect story to write, and my father wrote it. And I have the book here, if I can find it. It's called the Parnasse. Where is it? Okay, I have this one. I also have the original one, the hardcover, which I'll get it. Here's this. Anyway, here is the Parnasse, which he wrote about that particular individual. And why do they say what happened on that street is because at the end of World War II, near the end of World War II, Pardos Raka, which was his name, the Parnasse, he wasn't able to leave. I'll pass this around, you can see his picture. He wasn't able to leave the house because he was afraid to go out. And he knew the Nazis were coming, but he didn't want to leave. So he had some Christians staying with him in the house. And anyway, the story of the Parnasse revolves around the last 2 weeks of his life, because what happened was, it's kind of ironic. The Germans destroyed the 4 bridges on the Arno River. The Americans were on the other side of the Arno River. The Germans were on his side of the Arno River, you see. Anyway, it tells you what went on between the Christians in his house and Pardo. The Christians didn't want to leave either. They were sort of older people. And the end result was the Nazis came and killed all of them, just because they were there. You know, no reason, just killing them. And that's why it mentioned the massacre on St. Andrews Street. Now, my father lived right across the street from the Parnasse. I mean, you know, it's not a few yards away. So that gave him the impetus to write this book, the Parnasse, which, by the way, has been translated into, it's in Spanish, Italian, Hebrew, and even Japanese. I have the Japanese version here. So if anybody wants to brush up on their Japanese, here it is. Anyway, I'm leaving all the books here. I mean, I'm taking them home with me, but you can look at them here, and then I'm going to go into all of his books after. Okay, so anyway, so here's the narrow streets, and Pisa looks like this now. Like I said, this was the picture I took last October. And anyway, okay, and there's the street named after him. I was wearing shorts. My brother doesn't like shorts. There's my brother. He looks like our mother. I look like our father. And this is actually Largo S. Arieti. Largo means big street, but the street is not really that big. It's only a few blocks. And it's in back of a co-op, so that makes it easy to find, because trying to find the street was quite difficult, actually. It's hidden in the back somewhere, and we had to use the GPS on our cell phones to find it. But nevertheless, this is my brother and I in October. This year was between October 5th and October 13th of 2014. So anyway, he looks like our mother again. I know I repeated myself. But anyway, you can see how warm it was. My brother doesn't like to wear shorts. I do. I dress for the occasion. If it's hot, I dress as if it's summertime. If it's cold, of course, I wear long pants. But anyway, that's the street. Now, in 1938, my father came on the Queen Mary. And this was a picture. It's amazing how good pictures are. This is my father here. This, I'm not sure who he is. It could be his brother, but I'm not sure. This is his aunt, his uncle, Enrico, and that's his wife, Vanna. And this is, one of these is Giacomo, and the other one is Giulio. Giulio became a psychiatrist, too. He actually wrote one of the books with my father, but he's since passed away of cancer. I think this is Jackie. Jackie is a famous rabbi. He became a rabbi, and he's now living in New Jersey. He's 80-something, and he still works at a congregation. So anyway, that's a cool picture. So there's my father. And this could be his brother, but I'm not sure. Isn't that cool? Now, he had to escape. Let me tell you something. In the day he graduated medical school, this is what he told me. He says, Mussolini said, Jews can't practice medicine in Italy. Can you imagine? That's a hell of a graduation gift, right? So of course, he had to figure out what to do. Fortunately, he had an aunt in the United States that he could, that could support him, you know, when he came. So he came to the United States after he got his MD degree at the University of Pisa. By the way, the two best universities in Italy are the one in Bologna and the University of Pisa. So, you know, Pisa being a small town, I'm surprised they have such a good university, but that's what they say. So anyway, so he came to America where he did work at Columbia University to finish up to become a psychiatrist. Okay, first he was a neurologist, then he became a psychiatrist. And that's Enrico there. He's real, well, we call him Henry in English, it's Enrico in Italian, and there's Vanna. Those are his kids, Jackie and Julia. He met my mother, and this is the wedding picture that they had in 1941. It was December 14th, 1941, and so they got married there. Too bad I wasn't there at the time. But anyway, there's me in 1948. I was a cute little kid, wasn't I? Yeah, look at that. Anyway, here's my grandfather. There's me, and here's my father. I was 3 at the time. I don't even remember that picture, but you know, I can't remember everything. And then here's my father standing in front of all his diplomas. And anyway, I just want to show you one last thing of pictures. This is the house of the Parnasse, okay? The one that he wrote about. It was literally across the street from where he was born. And this is also a plaque. I don't have the translation, but I'll tell you what it was. This plaque, hey, how's it coming, Jack? Is that all right? Okay. This plaque tells you about the names of the people who were living in the house who were not Jewish, but it didn't matter. You know, he would take anybody, and they were all killed by the Nazis, you see. So it's like a plaque. And so, they put the plaque, I believe, after he wrote the story, the Parnasse. So that's the house of the Parnasse. And it's interesting to see the history of this. Now, in 2001, they dedicated the street to him. So we went there, and it was in October of 2001. And we actually went inside the house, and we went to the backyard. The government of Pisa made a deal with the owners, or the people who lived there. Actually, there was an American woman. She had to be in a wheelchair. I think her name was Barbara, and she was living in the house. And they took us to the back, and we saw everything there. We went to the backyard and everything. So it was quite an experience to see the actual house where these atrocities took place by the Nazis. You know, I think someone else owns it now, but other than the sign, Pisa has been cleaned up. You don't see any evidence of war whatsoever other than that. Okay, now, what I'm going to do next, maybe I should turn on the lights, is show you, oh wait, I do have something else here. I'm sorry, I knew I had some stuff. We're not finished by far with the computer stuff. Okay, I have something of interest now. I want to show you this information all about him, what he has done. We're going to talk about Peter, Paul, and Mary and what that has to do with him later. But I want to show you this first. Let me just scroll down. I don't want to make anybody busy. Okay, this is they call it the curriculum, what he has done in his life, okay? I'll go over everything with you real quick, and then I want to show you his works. And this is why he became quite famous, I guess. In 1932, he graduated from Galilee High School. He got a degree in medicine with honors. It said 36. Actually, they made a mistake, the people who wrote it. I think it was 36 or 38. Oh, wait, it must have been 38 he finished. 36 was a mistake. It was 38 because he came in 39 to America. Okay, anyway, he got a fellowship in neuropathology at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. He was a visiting fellow in primates. Primates include, you know, the class primates, which actually includes, you know, apes, humans, monkeys, chimpanzees. And then in 1944, he was certified by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. He graduated in 1952 in psychoanalysis at the William Allison White Institute, where he became a professor. He taught psychiatry from 1954 to 61. Also at the Williams and Allison White Institute. Well, in 1958, he was there. 1961, he was a professor of clinical psychiatry, New York Medical College. And since then, he was also president of the Williamson Alison White Psychoanalytic Society, president Society of Medical Psychoanalysis, you see it all there, president, Academy of Psychoanalysis, vice president, Association for the Advancement of Psychotherapy, and editor of the Journal of Psychoanalysis. And then he got the gold medal award for this one. And then he also won the Frieda Fromm Reichman Award for his knowledge on schizophrenia. And then in 1975, he won the National Book Award in the field of science for interpretation of schizophrenia, the second edition, and I'll show you all those books. And then he won the Sigmund Freud Award from the American Association of Psychoanalytic Physicians. Well, you see it over here, for exceptional results obtained in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. As author, teacher, and clinician, the gold medal of the American Association for the Advancement of Psychotherapy. So evidently he won a lot of awards. Now, as for his works, maybe I should, let me just zip real quick here. As for his work, he started writing, let me see, other than the books. Okay, these are all the books he wrote. 1955, he started, the first book was Interpretation of Schizophrenia. And let me tell you about this, and then I'll go into some of his articles. The first book he wrote was actually quite interesting. Because, you know, publishers do not want to publish a book unless they feel they can get some money, you see? So what did they do? This is the most interesting story of them all. He said, well, they told him that if he buys a couple thousand books, they will publish it. So he said, okay. So wait, it gets better. So, okay, so he agreed. So he bought, this was the original 1955 issue. He bought a couple thousand. And then a few months went by, and all of a sudden, a guy named Rosenthal, who was the hero of all this, he was the publisher, he came and he started knocking on his door. He said, quick, quick, give me back all your books. We have a tremendous demand for them. So he sold them all back, and ever since then, they would publish anything he wrote, you see? So he was lucky. So anyway, if you want, I can pass these around. Why not? And so that was the original one. And so that's the story on that. And I feel, you know, that's pretty cool. You know, he says, quick, give them all back to me. We have a demand. Evidently, that's what highlighted my father into fame. And then, okay, I might as well show you this too. I'm going to put the books with this. He became the editor-in-chief of the American Handbook of Psychiatry. And I brought all 7 volumes here that he edited. Okay, there are 7 volumes. They're all different. The only thing that's the same is his name is out in front as editor-in-chief. And I must admit, it was a big schlep to get him here today. But anyway, you can look at these, and these are written by many people. He was just the editor. He put the articles together. You know, he would ask people if they would write the articles and in them, and which they did. And so anyway, that's that one. And then it was translated into Italian, which I do not have. But anyway, they translated it. I did see it when I went to Italy, and actually I went there in 1998 too for a meeting honoring him, and I did see that. And then he has another one called The Intrapsychic Self, Feeling, Cognition, and Creativity in Health and Mental Illness. And I should have, here it is. I have it here somewhere too. You guys are welcome to come on up and look at the books after if you want. That's that one. I think the library has a few of his here, don't they? Yeah, in both campuses of Oakton, they have his books. And then we have the World Biennial of Psychiatry. I have here, that comes in 2 volumes. This is the World Biennial of it. And this was written again by a number of people where he put, he had some people write, I believe that's, yeah, he has some people write about it. You know, he has some of his friends write into that one as well. And then The Will to Be Human, that has quite an interesting name. Let's see where that is. I have that here somewhere. The Will to Be Human. Here it is. That's this one. And it says here, should the margin of autonomy man has rested from the forces controlling him be surrendered or enlarged, the psychiatrist explores the potential of man's will. So those of you who are interested in will, we have that one. And then we have the American Handbook let's see, volume, well, this has 7 volumes, and that came out over a period of time. And then we have translated in Italian, some others. So we have a lot of his books here. I have all of them in English, and I do have some translations, which I'll show you. Another one of his that he wrote with Jules Bemperad, he was the baby I showed you there. It's called Severe and Mild Depression. And I know some people who are depressed, I actually do, and I tell them to go look at the book and see what he has to say. That's here, the Severe and Mild Depression. And another one that they used on creativity. Now, my father was very creative. And this is where Peter, Paul, and Mary come in. They were using this book at Columbia University, and some people wanted to actually use some chapters in this book, so he gave them permission. This is about creativity, why people are creative and things like this. And again, you can look up the information on this. And so what happened was he got involved with Peter Yarrow. Anybody know the name? He's the Peter, Paul, and Mary fame, and he became a good friend of my father's. And later on today, I'm going to play something for you that Peter went to my father's house, and they had a party there. I was in Israel at the time, so I wasn't there, and they were celebrating, and they taped it. So I'm just going to play a little bit of the tape. So it's amazing, all these little audio-visual things that we have. And then in 1978, they asked him to write another book, but what he did was he put together many of his articles that he wrote. And this book became on schizophrenia, phobias, depression, psychotherapy, and the farther shores of psychiatry, and that's this one up here. And again, this consists of his works that he chose to put in here. The picture in the back does not look quite complimentary. It looks something like Boris Karloff in one of the movies. But anyway, these are his papers. And I don't see it there, but he wrote a book with my brother, in other words, his son, who's classics. My brother, by the way, is a professor of Greek and Latin and ancient Greek and classics at Hampton-Sydney, Virginia, in Hampton-Sydney. Hampton-Sydney is the same name as the town. And my brother has one problem, though. You know, he teaches ancient Greek, but the only thing is he's got a tough time practicing because there aren't too many ancient Greeks walking the streets. I just thought I'd mention that. Anyway, it's called Love Can Be Found, and so he wrote it together with my brother. Now, many of these books have been translated, and I have the interpretation of schizophrenia in Italian. I have it in Japanese. Yes, evidently Japanese may have lots of schizophrenics. We have Italian, it's translated, and German. I also have it in German over here too, so you guys can practice your German. And then I have the Parnasse in Italian, in Hebrew. I don't know if I brought the Hebrew version here with me, but anyway, it's also translated in Hebrew. Okay, so now, what I want to do is show you his other works. And he began writing articles, okay, in 1941. I'm not going to go over though, I'm just going to show you the list. And they call this his bibliography. So he made a big list of, they made a big list of all his journals, okay? Starting in 1941, histopathological changes in experimental metrazole convulsions in monkeys. And then, you know, he worked his way up. So he has a whole bunch of, I think, over 100 publications in articles. So this, of course, added to his ability to see patients, and, you know, and become quite well known. Of course, his main field was schizophrenia. And anyway, he also wrote, oh yes, this is very important. In 1960, he wrote the article on psychosis, or on schizophrenia, in the Encyclopedia Britannica. So they asked him to write that also, and which he did. And you can probably get it now, the old versions. And what they do is at the end of these articles, they put the initials of the author. And then I imagine you can find out who else did it. So that was one of his major pieces of work, and then, of course, the rest come from psychiatric journals, American Journal of Psychotherapy, and things like this. Sometimes, too, I want to point out, the airlines would contact him, and they actually had an article about him. You know, when you fly, they give you the name of the airline or the special, you know, magazine. Well, they had him in there in one of the magazines talking about his work. So when you're flying to wherever you're going, you can read about him. So that's literally flying high, you know. Anyway, so they have that. And anyway, so these are just the articles that he wrote. And the last one, you know, I mean, these are all in the psychiatric journals. There's quite a few. Here's another one called Psychotherapeutic Approach to Schizophrenia. And now this one was after his death, but evidently it was written, and then they published it. Now, all right, let me go on now to a few other things that I want to mention. And as I mentioned to you about Peter, Paul, and Mary, I don't think he was friends with Paul Yarrow or Mary Travers, who passed away a number of years ago. But Peter was the one he became friends with because they started an organization together called the Creativity Foundation, okay? And of course, here's an older picture of Peter, Mary, and Paul. Peter and Paul are still around, and she died a few years ago. By the way, his name is Paul, I forgot his last name. His first name was Noel. Oh, Paul Stuckey. His real name was Noel Paul Stuckey. Her name was Mary Travers, and then as far as I know, Peter Yarrow. Well, that's his name, and of course, they've aged. So what I want to do now, though, is to play just a little bit of the music that I got when he was in the house, and then we're going to show my father actually interviewing a patient, if it will work. If not, I'll show you something else about him so you can actually see him in action. All right, let me see. All right, this was, oh, by the way, this was in the 70s, this little piece. It's only a few minutes. Yeah, that's Peter. So that's Peter at my father's house. Then some other cases. He was on a case.
No one would ask me, should I come? Birds sing, no one asks why. I have wings in myself, I can see them. If you see something else, keep it close to yourself. I'll fly free then. Yesterday's eyes.
Okay, we don't want to go into that, but anyway, so that was in my father's house. Now, there were a number of cases in which my father was on, the most famous of which was the Boston Strangler. You heard of that? A fellow by the name of Albert DeSalvo. Evidently, he would strangle women. And Albert DeSalvo had a lawyer named Bailey, okay, the famous, I think it was F. Lee Bailey. Now, my father wanted, based from what I understand, that he said, look, let's study Albert DeSalvo, okay? There's a reason why he does this, of course, a psychological reason. And Bailey didn't want it, so there was a little conflict there. So anyway, that's his most famous case, and he did some others. He had some other famous cases, and he would be called upon. As far as I know, that was one of his most famous cases, which also attributed to his fame. Now, what I'm going to do is see if I can get this to work. I always have trouble sometimes. Let me see if this, there it is. Okay, let's keep our fingers crossed. We'll actually see him in action. Let's see here. Now, this took place in the 70s. He's actually interviewing a patient. It's a female 19-year-old girl named Marie. And whenever he writes about patients, he only uses the first name, of course, you know. You don't want to give the whole name of the person. So I think you will find this interesting. If we can get it to work. That's the big issue. Can you get to work or not? Okay, keep your fingers crossed. It's turning black. Now, I tried to get this to work. If it doesn't work, we're gonna do Plan B. We have all sorts of stuff ready for
Need
it.
to close previous one.
What?
Need to close previous one. Close black.
Close which?
The
This?
black screen, the previous one.
Close that? That's where he's speaking. Close, wait for the program to respond. Now, I checked it with my computer at work. And if we can't do that, we'll do something else. We just have to wait. Video clip, that's one. And this, it should work because I have it on a 1 terabyte drive. We just have to wait. What do you think, Camilla, it'll work? What should I do?
No, it's trying.
It's trying to find it. Let's try it again. Let's close it and open it again. Because I did have it working.
Wait.
Oh, there, hold on. It's black, you gonna work or not? Connecting, come on, work.
It's connecting.
Maybe you should all put your mind saying, work. Use a little, okay, if it doesn't work, we'll go to Plan B. I'll try Plan B better, okay? We'll go to Plan B and see what happens there. We'll go to Plan B. Come on. Okay, we'll go to Dropbox, where I have some of his stuff, and good thing I did that. So if we can't get him seeing a patient, what we're gonna do is to see him give a lecture for a few minutes, and to see what he sounds like. Come on. You're gonna always have trouble with, what's that say? Yes. Okay. There. All right, if it comes up, it'll come up with Dropbox. Now, sign in. Good thing I have some spares here. Could be the computer. I have a very advanced computer that runs basically anything. Sign in. There we go. Here he is, this should work.
Fight against depression states that a pill is the most effective method for changing the human being from sad to glad. My voice is one among the few to reaffirm the importance of psychological factors, both in the etiology and in the therapy of this common condition. Ladies and gentlemen, in over 30 years of clinical experience with depression, I have never seen a case about which I could say that there was no psychological factor involved. I have never seen a patient about whom I could say that his depression was unrelated to his prior anguish, or about whom I could say that his depression came from nowhere and its origin had to be sought exclusively in a metabolic disorder. And yet, I want to stress that my experience deals predominantly with cases of severe depression, called by many authors endogenous depression. In the present paper, I shall deal only with these severe or psychotic depressions. Having in mind the second paper that I shall deliver this afternoon and some aspects of a psychotherapeutic approach to the severely depressed, I will outline now some psychodynamic views of depression on which the therapeutic approach is based. Time limitations compel me to select only the salient parts of a long procedure which has been described in a book by Benporat and myself, Severe and Mild Depression.
That's his cousin.
The patient who becomes severely depressed cannot put into operation the mechanisms adopted by a normal person who recuperates from a feeling of sadness, grief, bereavement. For example, a normal individual hears the news of the unexpected death of a person he loved. After he has understood and almost instantaneously evaluated what that death means to him, he experiences shock, then sadness. For a few days, all thoughts connected with the deceased person will bring about a painful, almost unbearable feeling. Any group of thoughts, even remotely connected with the dead person, will elicit sadness. The individual cannot adjust to the idea that the loved person does not live anymore. And since that person was so important to him, many of his thoughts or actions will be directly or indirectly connected with the dead person and therefore will elicit sad reactions. Nevertheless, after a certain period of time, that individual adjusts to the idea that the person is dead. By being unpleasant, sadness seems to have a function, its own elimination. It will be removed only if the individual is forced to reorganize his thinking, to search for new ideas so that he can rearrange his life. He must rearrange especially those ideas that are connected with the departed, so that the departed will no longer be considered indispensable, that is, to the equilibrium of the psychological structure of the survivor. Like pain, sadness thus stimulates a change in order to be removed. But it is a psychological change, an ideational change, a rearrangement of thoughts and clusters of thoughts. Eventually, the actions of the individual too will alter as a consequence of this cognitive rearrangement. In other words, in normal sadness, after a period of slowness or inactivity that prevents quick responses, there is a reorganization of functions, first cognitive and then motor, which aims at bringing about a return to a state of normality. The person who becomes seriously depressed cannot use these recuperative mechanisms, cannot do what I call sorrow work.
By the way,
He finds himself
something
in a
else to show
psychological
you with
trap
patient.
from which he cannot escape. The overpowering feeling of depression keeps in a state of unconsciousness or dim consciousness cognitive structures and pattern of life which started at an early age. In other words, depression has, among others, the function of repressing cognitive structures. According to my studies of patients treated with psychotherapy, there is always a preceding ideology or a way of seeing oneself in life in general, or in relation with another particular person, or with a goal to be achieved.
I have now something, yeah, come on in. Yeah, come on in. All right, come on in, yes. Yeah. I'm going to show you something now. I just remembered I have another plan here, and so I'll show you some more of his work. That comes, oops, what happened here? It has a piece of film. Okay. I'll go back to that if I can't get these, but I do think I have some others that I have here that I'm able to get. I forgot about that. You know, me and technology sometimes don't get along. There we go. Okay, let me see. Trust it. Yeah. Okay, this is the one where he does meet with a girl. If we can get one of his patients. It's only 1 minute, so that should work if this will come up. And let's hope. Could be the computer here. It's not working too well. No, there it goes. Come on, keep your fingers crossed. This is the one. Come on, come on, come on. It's just taking a while for it to get there. But this only lasts 1 minute, so it's not that big, so it should be able to handle it. Oh, that's probably.
No, one of those two windows, because it's trying to boot it up twice, I think.
There. Okay. That's it.
Marble, you couldn't move, you couldn't do anything, but I knew that you were listening to me.
So
I knew that you were in contact with me, and as a matter of fact, I felt that this contact later on was increasing, and so that we could eventually communicate.
Yes.
Could you explain to me what really gave you the strength or the ability or the nerve, I don't know, to talk to me?
I mean, why? What
Why?
was it about? What was it about you that made me trust you and that made me have confidence in
Well,
you?
you could put it that way if you want. Yes. What
I don't know.
transformed you from a person?
I don't know. It seems to me that you're very kind, a very compassionate man. Something about your face, maybe it's your eyes, I don't know. And my parents would take me to the office while I was still at the hospital, and the atmosphere of the office was so accommodating and so warm and so nice. And I don't know, it was just something, a total feeling of comfort and confidence that I felt when I was in your presence that made me confide in you.
And what about the other doctors in the hospital?
No, I didn't like the doctor that I had in the hospital. He would come and talk to me for 3 minutes, and it would be a 1, 2, 3 affair, and I couldn't even talk to him. He talked so fast to me. He would ask me questions, and I'd hardly have a chance to answer before he asked me the next question. He said, well, I'll see you tomorrow, Marie. I'll see you tomorrow. And it seemed that I could never communicate with him. He was good about drugs and administering pharmaceutical remedies to me, but he wasn't a psychiatrist. My God, he was a monster.
Well, all right. Yeah, well, all right, let's watch. I have a couple of those. I forgot I had those because I was hoping the other one would work because we have the whole half-hour interview with that lady. It's real interesting, and I'll tell you what she says. That particular girl fell in love with a priest, okay? This was a problem. And they discuss it. Now, it even gets sort of stranger when she actually thought the priest was a vampire. And I'm not making this up. That's why I wanted to show you the whole thing. And it was real interesting the way my father discussed with her. She actually thought that he was a vampire, acted like one in a way. Now, this is real. I'm not making it up. I know many of you know, like I tell jokes sometimes, but this is no joke. So tell you what we'll do. We'll go into another one of those little vignettes, and I will get it now. Fortunately, these actually, what you see there, notice you see the translation in Italian, and the reason for that was this was one of the ones that were shown in Pisa when we went in October, you see, so the Italians can see it. So let's take another one here. We don't want a long one. Oh, okay, recalling catatonia. This is an interesting one too. I think she's the same patient he worked with on that one. So we'll try that one. Catatonia is where you stay in one position without moving. Yes.
Marie,
Yes?
we are here again. We have seen the videotape which was made 6 weeks ago.
Yes.
And I was quite moved.
So was I.
It was quite an exciting experience.
Yes.
I think that I asked you many questions, and the way you answered really made me feel once more how you felt about
Yes.
certain things which were so important,
Yes.
so important in your life. And yet, it seems to me, I forgot to ask you some important questions at
Yes.
that time,
Yes.
which I would like to ask you now.
Yes.
I remember the beginning when you were very sick, when I came to see you in the hospital, when you couldn't move, when you were like a piece of marble, like a statue, you couldn't do it. You told me that you were aware, however, that possibly you could move. You could move, and yet you didn't dare to move.
Yeah.
Could you explain to me why couldn't you move at all?
Well, it was a very strange feeling, and I now still have a very vague recollection of how the whole thing occurred, but it seemed to me that if I tried to move, lifting my head was painful in itself. I felt as if my circle, my halo, had been taken off my head, and that it was wrong for me to bring my head up, and it was very painful. I felt that In other words, I would disrupt the order of the universe if I
In other
moved
words,
my
a
body.
movement that has the power to disrupt the
Yeah,
order of the
it's
universe.
wrong.
How can a movement do that?
I don't know, it's wrong. I guess it was out of the sense of guilt that I had over the whole thing that happened.
A movement that had a cosmic aspect.
Yes, it was so universal, as if my movements would determine the cause of the future and of the rest of the world. It was insane.
So you
but
felt, in other words, that it was in your power to change the order of the universe, or to be able to disrupt the order of the universe.
so that it was wrong for me to move.
I see.
So, I have a couple more if you want. You want to see some more?
Yes.
Yeah, we have time, okay. Here's something, let's try this. Now, I'm not sure if he's with a patient on this one, but, let's see.
How does this relate to what we call a transference
Being
situation?
interviewed
In the
by-
transference situation, we would assume that you would embellish you and make you into omniscient and omnipotent person. How do you deal? Do you accept that position that she places you in, or do you present her with the reality of yourself as a human
No,
being?
I remind her constantly of my human proportions. In some aspects of the transference are allowed. For instance, I want her to trust me completely. I want her to tell me everything. I want her to know that I really want to help her and to do anything in my power.
All that sounds human. That sounds human.
I want her to know that I have experience with her illness.
Right.
She often refers to me as a genius. I tell her that I'm not a genius, although I have been able to understand her condition.
Yeah, we'll try one more. Might as well use them while we got them, right? Either use it or lose it. All right, let's get back here. I'm glad we have these, and actually, again, as I mentioned, this was good that my brother gave me these because he actually spoke for a half hour too about our father, and let's see, first insights. Let's see if this will work. All right, and so he put this together. He speaks a good Italian. I don't. I can
I
speak
understand
Hebrew.
your hospital system here at Pilgrim State Hospital in New York State. Could you share a little of that?
Yes, I started to work there in 1949 after I finished 2 years at the New York Psychiatric Institute where I did neuropathology. While I was at Pilgrim State Hospital, I observed something which appeared to me.
Could you repeat, what year were you there?
At the Psychiatric Institute from
Yes.
39 to
39, I thought
41.
you said 49.
No, 39
right.
to 41. And then from 41 to the beginning of 46, I was in Pilgrim State Hospital. And while I was there, I observed a certain phenomenon which appeared to me very, very interesting. I found out that some patients who had been in hospital for many years and were in the so-called back buildings where regressed patients would stay, would apparently recover, presented for parole, as we used to say at that time, and they were discharged. They were the so-called spontaneous recoveries. That is the term which was used at that time. Well, I looked into the matter, and I found out that these apparent spontaneous recoveries were not spontaneous at all, but were the result of an interpersonal relation which had developed between the nurse or the attendant and the patient. Those were war years. There was very little personnel. We had to do the best we could. And the attendants and nurses, of course, developed some special affections for patients who could work. There was an exchange.
How many
there.
patients were assigned to you? I had 900 patients in those war years.
Well, I had a comparable figure. But let me stick to these people that I mentioned. So, as a consequence of this relation, approval because of work, exchange. The patient works, the attendant or the nurse gave special consideration and privilege. There was a blossoming of the personality of the patient, so that the patient could eventually be discharged. I noticed this only in female services because that's where I worked, but I assume that the same thing could occur in male services. Now, much to my regret, however, these patients who were sent out sooner or later would come back to the hospital. They could not make it in another environment. Nevertheless, I felt that what I had observed, that really this regression had disappeared, at least temporaneously, on account of this interpersonal relation, was very important. The schizophrenic process was reversible, was not irreversible. And I thought that maybe if something could be done to maintain this level, perhaps we could do a great deal for the schizophrenic patients. But I did not know how. I didn't know. I had studied by myself many things which gave me some kind of background. I had studied, the prevailing psychiatry of that time, Henderson and Gillespie. In translation, I had read and studied Bunke, famous treaty of psychiatry, the German textbook, and then of course I had read Freud, but Freud was not interested in treating.
How about Bloiler?
And Bloiler, of course, Bloiler. Bloiler, who interested me very much because of the study of his thinking disorders, but I want to tell you something, that actually my interest in the thinking disorders of the schizophrenic goes further in time than my reading of Eugene Bloiler. While I was in college, I studied an Italian philosopher by the name Giambattista Vico, who studied primitive thinking in the ancient civilizations, in poets, in myths, and this was a very good preparation because actually when I was confronted later on with schizophrenic thinking, I felt that this weekend preparation had equipped me to understand some of their delusions. However, neither Vico nor Freud nor Bloiler had taught me how to deal with the schizophrenic at the interpersonal level. This I learned later when I joined the William Alanson White Institute.
Okay, so anyway, I think you've seen enough of, so you see him in action, I guess. I think it's quite interesting that we're able to have all these videos now so you can actually see the way he worked. And what I really wanted to do was to show you the half-hour interview with that girl, but for some reason I couldn't get it. I was hoping I could. But anyway, so much for technology, but at least some of it works. So anyway, now there was one other thing that I wanted to tell you, that I had here a picture of the stamps and the envelope and a postcard that they made. See, they made an envelope stamped, and they actually put a stamp of the picture of him. You know, when they do a stamp, the black ink, they have a picture of him on the black ink, and then here's a postcard of him. So I put it all on there. So you can all look here, and let me just show you the whole book collection here for a moment, and then I think I ran out of things to say. And if anybody wants one of my business cards, yeah, I teach environmental science and biology, by the way, at 3 different schools, mainly at Oakton and Columbia College of Missouri up in Gurnee, and at Columbia College of Chicago downtown. Now, I want to show you 2 other things that are interesting. Have any of you ever seen that movie K-Pax? You have. Let me tell you something. What does K-Pax have to do with my father? Okay, I want to show you this. This is an interesting story. Let me go up here. I'm going to show you K-Pax. You saw it. Anyone else remember the movie? It was a movie with Kevin Spacey. Now watch. Okay, you heard about it? He plays a psychiatric patient. And again, get K-Pax. Okay. Here is the image of it. See, Kevin Spacey. See, and Jeff Bridges played a psychiatrist who was trying to treat him. And Kevin Spacey thought, we'll just go back there, that he was from another planet called K-Pax. Okay, K-Pax was written by a fellow by the name of Gene Brewer, who now lives in Maine, and he's actually a PhD. He did research in DNA. However, he wrote the book K-Pax, where the movie was made from. And I want to read you something here. And it says, when we successfully treat a patient, we experience a burst of joy because we have helped a suffering person who is happy to have known us. But we also feel a secret joy because we have come to know him. And in knowing him, we know more of ourselves. Well, this was a quote from my father. He put it right there, Silvano Arieti. So this is pretty cool. So I managed, I'll tell you how I got a hold of this. I didn't know this existed until I was teaching at Wabansi. And, you know, I like to talk a lot to all the teachers, you know, I like to talk. And one of the teachers says, is your father Silvano Arieti? I says, yes, because, you know, my last name is not that common. And he said, well, did you know he's mentioned in this book K-Pax? I said, no, let me look. So I looked at the book, and I had to get a hold of Gene Brewer. Now, here's how coincidence, or maybe God's hand, has come in. At that same time, I was teaching at Truman College. I was at 6 colleges at one time, in one semester, teaching 37 credits. How's that? Well, I did it. As you see, I survived. Anyway, I taught together with another teacher by the name of Ann, who taught at Truman College. And I'm happy to mention, you know, this book, I'm trying to get a hold of a guy named Gene Brewer. And you know what she told me? She knows Gene Brewer's family because that's one of their friends.
Oh, wow.
This is incredible. So she gave me she got a hold of, this is incredible, of all the, what, 7.2 billion people in the world, she knows his phone number. She gave me his phone number. I called him up, and I became in touch with him. I told him, you know, I read your book, and I'm writing another book. Perhaps you would like to see what I wrote. And this was my first book. I wrote 2 books, one called The Earth is My Patient, and the other one called Prognosis Disaster, the environment, climate change, human influences, vectors, disease, and the possible end of humanity. I know it's a very optimistic title, but anyway, so he told me that the book, The Earth is My Patient, needs a lot of editing. So I managed to find an editor, and I did it at Columbia. It was pretty bad, but now it's good. And by the way, this young lady there, she's the editor of my second book called Prognosis Disaster. She's an English teacher at Columbia, and yes, she speaks and writes English better than I does. I just thought I'd clarify. Anyway, but so anyway, wasn't that coincidence? So I got in touch with him. I told him, and he told me where this quote came from. I think it came from the Father Shore's book. He told me the exact page number or something. Anyway, it was in there. And then he sent me this book that he autographed to me, and he sent me another book called On a Beam of Light, which was about the same individual. He comes under the same name, Prote, and that was the name he went by. You know, he thinks he's from another planet, and he told, that's actually Prote too, and then he wrote another one. It was called Return to K-Pax, which he actually sent me, but he doesn't have it as a book. He sent it to me as a Word file, you know. So wasn't that coincidence? So I was really quite, of all the people, you're working with somebody who actually knows this guy. So it was real coincidence. Then, at Truman College, something really cool has happened once before. A number of years ago, you know, they have book sales, okay? So Truman, where I used to work for a number of years, they had a book sale. So there was this girl. She came back to the class, right, you know, and she showed me. She said, hey, look, I bought this book for $1. It's called Psychopathology, the Science of Understanding Deviance, okay? So I said, well, let me look in it. And sure enough, who do I see? I see my father in here. A picture. I said, man, that's my father. And I said, well, let me buy it from you. She said, no, I'll give it to you. I said, nah, I don't want to take it from you. I mean, just tell me how much it was. She says it was $1. So I said, okay. So I gave her $1 for it, and I found my father. So, you know, I felt quite honored. Now, I should have, let me show you his picture in here. Where is it? 220, maybe it's on page 220. I should have brought it, I didn't think of it at the time. There he is, see? So I said, man, that's my father. So I said, let me buy a book from you. So, interesting. So, you know, he keeps getting famouser and famouser, you know, everybody knows of him. And so I also, by sheer coincidence, you know, I used to live in Israel. And I met a lot of people there, and we met this psychologist, okay? And I'm talking to her, it's a woman, and I told her my last name, and we're discussing. She says, is your father Silvano Arieti? I said, yes. Remember, this is in Israel. So she showed me her thesis. She actually used some of his material in her thesis. So, you know, it keeps getting, as they say, bigger and bigger, you know, or whatever it was, biggering and biggering in Alice in Wonderland. So I feel honored all the time, and then sometimes, you know, I'm on the street and I meet people and they say, is your father Silvano Arieti? So, you know, it's interesting. And so I feel honored. And so I feel honored telling you all about it. And for me, it's a humbling experience, you know, because I didn't do anything. I was just bored, you know. And but I just like to share the goodness with him. So other than that, if you want, I'm all finished with what I have to say, but you can look at his books. And I think today I had to schlep about 100 pounds of books. So if you have any questions, ask. Yes?
Did you ever go back to Italy with your father, and what were some of the things he liked to do in Italy?
Yes, okay, good question. The only time I went to Italy, first of all, I stayed about 2 weeks with my grandfather in 1960 while my parents would go sightseeing somewhere else. They would leave me with my grandfather and my brother. They would send him to a camp in Switzerland. And no, he enjoyed it. And so I had a good time. I stayed with my grandfather, and here was something real interesting. Now, my grandfather didn't know English and I didn't know Italian. So we had a little problem there. So I told my grandfather, I never forget this. You know, he knew very little English. I said, I want to go up the Leaning Tower. And he says, no, you give me pain. You know, that's what he said. Because, you know, after all, he loved me and he was afraid I'd fall. So I said, okay, you know. So, but as for Italy, I never lived there for a long time, but my father would go back to visit his parents. You know, and of course, I would be in high school and things like this. But I want to tell you too, my father, I'll get to your question in a moment.
I was going to say, this is a great presentation, and your father's up there with Marconi and Fermi and all the other Italian-Americans.
Oh, right, yeah, yeah.
God bless your family.
So I feel lucky. But anyway, I want to tell you, he was a very good father. I want to tell you that too. You might think that if he's working all the time, how can he take care of his 2 kids, you know, my brother and myself? Well, on weekends, you know, he would be writing all the time. He would come home late. He would be in his office 12 hours a day. Sometimes seeing patients, other times writing. I mean, he would write all the time. Now, I'm going to explain to you something. He actually wanted to be a playwright. That was his first goal in life. He wanted to be a playwright. As a matter of fact, after he became a psychiatrist, I have some letters here that he sent to publishers, and they wouldn't publish any of his plays, you know. They gave him a song and dance about it, but he actually wanted to be a playwright. So what he did was, of course, he used his writing ability to write about psychiatry. So I myself think that it was better to write about psychiatry, but he did write some plays which I don't think were published. And by the way, somebody bought the movie rights to the movie The Parnasse, or to the book The Parnasse. And that's a book I encourage you to read. It's real simple, it's a short book, you know, there's not a lot of psychiatric words in it. You know, it's a book just written for the layman, you know, a simple story. Unfortunately, it shows you the brutality of the Nazis, you know, and the human race in general. And by the way, I want to go back now to my father. He was really a good father. When, like on weekends, he would take my brother and myself to the movies, and he would sit in between us and explain what's going on, you know, stuff like this. We would go to Europe a couple times. I remember when I was, I think, 5, 7, and 15, we would go on the the Queen Elizabeth, Queen Mary to Europe. You know, I must admit I had a good life. You know, I still remember the time. I still remember the smell of the dining room there. It was pretty cool. And as a matter of fact, I still have the menus from 1960. I think we went on the French ship to Flandre. They sold that, and we went to Europe. We went to Europe and also Israel, too. And so I must admit I had a good time growing up, and he sent me to private school. One was only 4 blocks from the house, which was great. You know, I didn't have to walk far. And my best friend, he lived in Brooklyn. He had to travel about an hour and 15 minutes a day by subway to get to school. And here I would walk 4 blocks. So anyway, and unfortunately, after 22 years, you know, he divorced my mother. But that's the way it goes, I guess. I felt sorry about that. But things happen. You know, it could have been a cultural difference or something like that. But essentially, he remarried, and my mother. Interesting story about my mother that I should share with you too. And when she was young, she was asked. Somebody asked her to marry her, and she said no. Okay, so she married my father. Then, when she got divorced, she met this fellow again, and they began to live together. So, like another husband and wife. And then, wait, my mother died, and then he went back to his first wife.
Oh my goodness.
Interesting story, right? So, anyway, things happen. That's really what happened. So it's quite interesting. And then I'm trying to think of any other stories. Oh yes, there's one story too that I should share with you because this has to do with his profession. One day he comes home really sad. And I said, Dad, what happened? Well, he said one of his patients committed suicide. Okay, so that's really heartbreaking for a psychiatrist. But he says he gets one about every 10 years, okay? And that was the saddest time I've seen him. And I said, well, no, what did I say? I was a teenager. I don't know. Somewhere around that age, and I felt sorry, but you know, you can't blame him because he's, you know, he doesn't control the patient, right? Yeah.
I hope your patient doesn't die.
Oh, yeah, my patient is what? Tell him what it is.
Your patient is the world.
The planet Earth. So, hey, I feel honored. I'm able to save the Earth. He saved a few thousand people. Maybe I've saved whole billions and trillions of bacteria, plants, fungi, everything. So, yes.
Did he ever convey to you what was the percentage of helping people? You know, I've heard like a percentage.
Yeah, it's a good question. I wish I knew the answer. But
Does
obviously,
anybody else?
now, let me tell you this from what I remember. Remember, you know, my field is not medicine, it's, you know, environmental. But from what I remember, and I remember a lot, my mother told me that he figured out that schizophrenics think totally different than other people. And he wrote it down. See, that was his discovery in a way, how they think. You see, something goes wrong with their thinking process. Now, here's the question I always ask psychiatrists now. I say, look, many of them know of my father's work. So I say, in fact, here, we have some psychology professors here who know of him. In fact, I have a friend at the other campus in Skokie. He read some of my father's books. You know, he was telling me. And I asked him, I said, do you think the theories about schizophrenia are actually good today, because we know that schizophrenia is like, it's a chemical imbalance. It could be genetic or chemical. They said yes, but some of his theories are still good today, despite the fact that, you know, that's why they give you drugs. You know, unfortunately, you go to a psychiatrist these days, they drug you up. They basically give you drugs, you know, which that's not treatment. Now, of course, my father would sit with the patient for 50 minutes, you know, they would call that literally the 50-minute hour, you know, and these are things I remember. And so, I don't know. You ask a very good question. I'm sure he was successful with some, but obviously, you know, if you have those that want to commit suicide, there's nothing you can do if they're bent on it, you know, it's a problem. I'm glad you asked that, because you know what? I actually wondered that myself. But obviously, he did have some good success. And by the way, there's something else which is unheard of these days. My father would go, get a load of this, to the hospital to visit poor patients for free, you see, because he figured he could do it. Also, he had a sliding scale of how much he would charge a patient, and I think that was fair. You know, if you're rich, why not pay more? Of course, you're not going to pay a fortune more, but you get the idea. He would charge them based on their income, which I think is fair, really, you know. Obviously, if you're dirt poor, there's no reason why you should pay. And if you're rich, I mean, it's not going to hurt you to pay a few more extra bucks to be treated. Do you agree? That's the way I feel. So he had a lot of these admirable events happen in his life, you know. And then one other time he called me. He wasn't sure if it was a joke or not, but he said Jacqueline Kennedy called him up once. And of course, it was probably true, you know, because he was famous, but nothing ever came of it, you know. I think she wanted him to see him. Whatever, he wasn't sure if it was a prank or not. Of course, you don't know. If you don't call back, how do you know, you know? But it's possible. And also, he would be called on other cases and go to court and, you know, and be a witness and things like this. So these are a lot of the things. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I remember specifically. I just knew he was a good father. He would take us. And one thing these days, I was lucky, you know, we always had, first of all, we lived in Manhattan. We rented an apartment for $360 a month. Can you imagine Manhattan in those days? Yeah, that's how much it cost. We lived in a number of places, 90th Street and Broadway, 111th Street, which was 5 blocks from Columbia University. So I grew up, I guess, in a pretty good time, you know, and I was lucky, okay, because we never went without, you know, we had clothes, I had education, he sent me to private school, and, you know, and so I felt lucky, and so I like to share what luck I have. Yes, sir.
You know, Dave, the lineage of Italian doctors goes on. Recently, I read something about an Italian physician who's also a scientist, who's discovered that people who have rheumatoid arthritis very rarely develop Alzheimer's. So this goes on and on. Your
That makes
father's
sense.
part of the situation of learning about people with mental illnesses.
Yeah, I mean, anything's possible, the correlations, right? You have one thing, it's just like sickle cell, you have the trait, you don't get malaria, you
Right.
know, that's what they discovered. There's a whole bunch of these type of incidences. Oh, by the way, I should point out too, that you know, my father was a doctor, his father was, and his grandfather was a doctor. So I come from a long line. Now, you're going to ask me, did I want to become a doctor? And the answer is yes. Actually, I'm kind of embarrassed to say, but I did. I went to medical school in Mexico, but I was in Mexico for only 5 months because the way they do things, you know, I didn't stay, which was good for me because, see, I managed to get into the Autonomia, that's the Mexican medical school, and I think after I left, a few months later, it was also the same year they held the Olympics. In 1968, there were riots, and about a few hundred students got killed in the riots, whatever they were, at that particular school. So it was probably a good thing I didn't stay there. Anyway, I really love what I'm doing now, so I'm actually glad I didn't become a doctor because, to be honest, I don't think I would have been a good one. I love doing this, teaching. I've been teaching now for over 30 years, so I love doing it. I think my father would be proud of me. You know, I'm not a doctor, but I don't want to brag. But anyway, are there any other questions, comments? I'll tell you anything. Yes.
I just wanted to know if you could elaborate a little bit on his connection with the Boston Strangler case?
Yeah, the only thing I know is, it's funny you mentioned that because, again, when I was at Wabansi, one of the teachers came over to me and she said, you know, she watched the show about the Boston Strangler and she says, was your father's name Salvatore, something like this? You know, I said, yeah, Silvano. And I said, yes, he was on the case, but I don't know much about it. I just know he was, I don't know if he was the chief psychiatrist or not. However, there was a movie made with Tony Curtis. Well, I think Henry Fonda played a psychiatrist in that one, but they didn't use my father's name, so I don't know, to be honest with you. And actually, it's funny you mentioned that, because I tried looking it up, actually. I went on the internet and looked to see Silvano Arieti and the Boston Strangler. I didn't find anything on there, but that doesn't mean, because I knew he was on it, and the fact that teacher came over to me, she heard about it, you know. So I don't know, I wish I knew more. Yeah, I'm trying to think some other cases he was on, but this was probably the most famous that most people know. Even in this day and age, you know, most people don't even know who the Lone Ranger is and stuff. Now, no, I'm serious in that, because I mentioned in my class we study DNA, but that's another, I really do that, but there's a reason I connect the two. Remember? Did I tell you about the law? Do we do DNA yet?
Yeah. Yesterday.
We see the Lone Ranger yesterday? Yeah, these young ladies and gentlemen are in my class. And we spoke about silver, and this horse is silver, and we tell them about the bases called A and G, adenine, guanine, and that's symbol for silver, and they belong to a group of chemicals called purine, so I say pure silver, and then I say, how do you wash silver? And the answer is you have the Lone Ranger put them in a car wash, you know. And then I play the beginning of the show, you know, the William Tell Overture. Da, 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 da. And you see, you know, I do stuff like this, but they don't forget, you see. So I do a lot of stuff like that. By the way, not to brag, but I also won 3 Best Teacher of the Year awards at 3 different schools, including Oakton. So, you know, I feel good. And this is what I do. I put in a whole bunch of stuff, right, in my classes. Now you'll never forget the Lone Ranger, right? Yeah. So anyway, I wish I could answer that question about the Boston Strangler, but I don't. That's the only information I know. Look, I was young when that happened. And by the way, if you watch the movie with Tony Curtis, I think he played Albert DeSalvo, is the guy's name. And by the way, they believe that he really was. You see, how do you know if he's really the Boston Strangler? Well, they believe after they caught him, they stopped. But again, that doesn't prove anything, but you know, it's suspicious that maybe he really was, you know. And now, with all this mental illness going around, it's a real problem now. What do we do with mentally ill people, you know? Remember, Reagan used to let them out, right? Put them back on the street, and we see a lot of them, and I see them in the streets of Chicago, and I feel sorry for them. And I think, you know, mental illness is a real problem these days. And you see, by the way, I'm going to give you some theories that I think my father would agree, and maybe he'd help. You know, all these wars, we see PTSD, okay? It's a big problem. I have a student now in one of my classes that has it, and I've seen others from previous classes, and they all behave similarly, you know? They're not the most brightest students, but they get by with C's and B's, and they get confused, and they all have similar characteristics. And this is one thing that war does, you know. The politicians are gung-ho sending these people to war, but they don't think about the psychological effects. You know, they want to be, hey, show machoism, right? War doesn't solve anything except, guess what? Makes things worse. I'm sure you all agree. And especially now in the Middle East again, it's a big problem. And I think this is what we need. We need, instead of politicians, psychologists running the world. That's my opinion. Do you agree? Because maybe, you know, let's make peace instead of war. And this is something I'm real